the Great Websites Are Made Before the First Line of Code is Written session. So if that's not the session you thought you were going to, now is your chance to exit stage left. Won't hurt my feelings. If you leave after the first slide, it'll hurt my feelings. Okay. My laptop's not actually changing the screen.
Just trying to make sure your feelings don't get hurt.
Oh, I gotta hit resume on presenter mode before it'll work. Right, maybe that's not it either? Seriously? Alright, we're gonna kill presenter mode because it was causing problems. And do it the old-fashioned way. Married screen. Give me a second here, start over. Alright, we're off to a rolling start. There we go. Okay. Yay, much better. Okay, so in case you're wondering who I am, Chris O'Donnell. I'm a digital strategist with ProMetSource, which is a Drupal consulting firm agency based out of Chicago, although I actually live in Richmond, Virginia. I built my first website in 1995. It was actually New Year's Eve. My wife was very pregnant. She went to bed very early, and I thought, hey, I'll learn HTML probably 1.0, I assume at that time. I did FTP the website up to the server before midnight. And 3 hours later, I figured out the chmod command to change Unix file permissions so anybody could actually see the site. But it was online before midnight. Also, it would not be the last time I spent 3 hours trying to figure out a Unix command, probably. I turned that into a job with a web design firm in Atlanta, like 3 months later in March or so of '96, and have sort of done the full stack of web technology jobs ever since. I went from web dev to selling all kinds of Sun servers to .coms, who didn't really need them, but they paid for them. Went into hosting, went into content syndication, took a 5-year detour into accounting software when I got burnt out on flaky web startups that didn't last very long. And then came back to web dev in 2012, joined a Drupal shop in 2014, and here I am. There's the contact info if you want to track me down. That personal URL is the current version of that site from 1995. It has stayed online ever since. And very thankfully, archive.org didn't get anything before '98. Some of that early stuff was bad. So who are you? This is the first time we've done this particular session, and I really had no idea anybody was going to come, or if people came, who would come. And we have a pretty good crowd, so maybe real quick, just sort of kind of what your role is, more than anything else. I'm kind of curious if we're getting designers, developers, sort of who's coming. Start, I guess, here.
I'm a product guy.
Okay.
Designer.
Yeah, designer.
Okay.
Content and QA.
Content and QA.
Development.
Technical writer.
Content.
Okay.
Development.
Content. Project manager.
Okay.
Content and design. UX design.
Digital marketer.
Okay.
Design.
Developer.
Developer.
Okay, so maybe like 50% design and the other 50% being dev and content. Cool. Okay. That's good to know. Alrighty. We'll get going. So what do we mean by driving strategy with human-centered design? Well, the reality is the world's best agile process can't save a project that never should have started in the first place. And that brings up the question, is human-centered design agile? We actually had a conversation about this at DrupalCon. A lot of people think that agile means you don't actually do any planning. I don't think that's true. I mean, you can try to build a complex website without planning anything and call it agile. Let me know how it works out. The reality is, I think when you're doing an agile process, the planning is just more flexible. And to build an analogy, if you're driving from Philadelphia to LA, you know, if you're going to plan out like every rest stop, every dinner stop, and where you're going to spend the night all the way through, that's sort of the old way of doing things. Agile would be like, every day at 4, I'll decide where I'm going to spend the night. So you kind of have daily sprint drives. That was a really bad analogy. But anyway, so I do think this fits into an agile world. I do think doing upfront planning and strategy before you try to build anything makes the agile process work better. And what we're going to talk about for the next 45 minutes is sort of how we do that. So we'll start off with the definition, human-centered design. Who's familiar with that term? We'll assume the design folks are. Okay. We'll start with the definition, a definition of design, which is the discipline of generating solutions to problems and opportunities through the act of making something new. That seems pretty reasonable. Human-centered design is basically just doing that, but with a laser focus on the actual user of the website, product, system that you're designing. We all have experience with systems that clearly were not designed with the end user in mind. Maybe anything involving the Department of Motor Vehicles in any state in the country, coach seating in any airline you may be on, right? Those clearly not designed for us. They were designed for maximizing revenue, right? And this human-centered design term comes from a group called the Luma Institute over in Pittsburgh, which is like a design training group that sort of, if you heard of user-centered design or design thinking, it's all pretty closely related. This is kind of their spin on it. Our creative director went through their training years ago. That's how we implement it, but I just want to make sure they get full credit for the idea so no one tries to me with a copyright thing saying I stole their idea. And then their sort of terminology is sort of look, understand, and make in terms of what you want to do before you actually build anything. So why do we do this? There's a couple of things that happen when you kind of start with the design process up front. Greater client engagement. For a practical matter, we're typically in a room full of whiteboards with 5 to 20 people from the client for 2 to 4 days, depending on the size of the project, to do these design exercises that we're going to go through. That's a lot of client engagement. It gets them super invested in how the project's starting, which keeps them sort of on your side all the way through. Early stakeholder alignment, I think, might be the most important benefit you get, because in a big organization, a large college, a government agency, marketing, IT, communications, PR, finance, they don't talk to each other that much. You pull them all into a room to redesign the website, and it might be the first time in years they've actually all gotten in a room and tried to make decisions together. And so even if it's the finance department who really don't care, because there's like one page on the website with like an email address if you have questions about an invoice, the fact that they were involved early, got their say, which might have been we don't really care, it just means later on the odds of them being a roadblock somewhere are much, much lessened. It just kind of makes the whole process go smoother. And then also knowledge transfer. Again, you're sort of locked in a room, real focused for 2 to 4 days with the client group. You're going to learn a lot. From a practical standpoint, as a guy whose job it is to always bring in new projects for the company, we never do one of these sessions where we don't walk out with like 2 to 4 other projects going on in the company that we didn't know existed before we were involved. So from a biz dev standpoint, you get a lot of good intel when you do this kind of stuff up front. Other benefits, right? When you take time before you build something to really understand the users, you're going to reduce risk. If you really are building for the end users of the system and you've done a good job understanding their needs, then the odds that the product's going to fail are greatly minimized. Also, reduced cost and complexity are pretty much the same thing. If you've got justification for not putting that feature in the system because you determine the users don't care, you've reduced the cost of building that feature, you've reduced the complexity of it causing something to break. And again, we talked about before the collaboration across user groups within an organization that don't always talk to each other. Good things happen when you get them talking to each other. So, how do we do it? As I said before, we literally set up a 2 to 4 day window with the client early on in the project before we build anything. Lock them all in a room full of whiteboards and go through a series of workshops and exercises, which I will go through in detail here in a minute, to basically pull out of our client who they think their users are, who the stakeholder groups are, who the important ones are, what they need, what they want, what problems they have with the current website, and how we can fix all this stuff. You can almost look at it as a process for running an effective meeting. It's kind of what you're doing. The whole point of pre-discovery and website project is to get all this stuff figured out. But if you don't have a good process to do that, you can spend 16 hours on site with the client and come out of it really without any really good insight on what you're going to do next. So what this human-centered design process does is it forces both us as the agency and the client group to actually get the work done that we want to get done, which is really understand the users. So kind of how does it work? Well, there's basically 3 big steps. And we're basically only talking about step 1 today, which is working with the client group to help them understand their users, get some empathy about what their users need and want from their website. Once you get all that done, you have to go talk to the users and validate what you think you just learned. Because I guarantee you, you're not going to be 100% right. Of course, in the real world, oftentimes client budgets mean step 2 won't happen. They'll just say, we know our users, we're going to go for it. It's their money. And only after you've understood the users, validated your assumptions, do you start actually designing anything. Because if we're going to make mistakes, we want to make them up here. Well, we haven't actually committed anything to code or Photoshop that's going to be expensive to undo. So, what does it look like? The way we do it, there's essentially 6 kind of major exercises that we'll do, and this is kind of the first day of the client engagement usually. So we'll kind of go through those 6 exercises, explain what they are, and then we're going to actually do some of the exercises. We're going to do stuff in this session. We're not just going to listen to me talk for 45 minutes because nobody wants that. So the first thing we usually do with them is stakeholder mapping. And I'm not doing this one because I could never draw that. It would just be mush. But the goal of this exercise is to identify pretty much everybody that's got a stake in the website or the app or the product, whatever it is that you're helping somebody design. And then to figure out and discuss and document the relationships between these groups and the website or system. It essentially becomes a network map of the people or groups that are affected by the website or the system. This does a couple of things. First of all, clients almost always think they have like 3 interested stakeholder groups. And you go through this exercise with them and they realize they have like 10, 12, 15, however many it is. So the clients almost always learn a lot here because they generally are just thinking about like, if it's a retail company, just the customers or maybe the partners. They're not thinking about the internal users that have to put all the content in the website and how bad their back end might be for content management because nobody ever thought those people mattered. But they're users, they're stakeholders, and they're super important because if they can't do their job, then the front end of the website doesn't work, right? So we spend a good couple of hours probably in most cases really with the customer, making sure we understand who the stakeholders for the system are, kind of group them together in this case as internal and external, and sort of map how they relate together. And then after we do that, we make the customer pick the 3 to 5 that are really the most important. And I know we all want to say everybody's important, every stakeholder is important, and they are, but some are more important than others, right? I mean, if you're redesigning the flagship site for Drexel.edu, right? You're working with Drexel. That website is mostly, what's the main purpose of any college's primary homepage?
Recruitment.
Exactly, recruitment. It's about getting 16 and 17-year-old kids and their parents to start the application process, sign up for a tour, so forth, right? Yeah, alumni are important. There's probably another website where alumni are the most important because they already trying to draw some money out of them, right? But the .edu site is for the kids. It's for the parents, it's recruitment. So the alumni stakeholder, I mean, you're a stakeholder, but they're not one you're going to design for. You're designing, to the interest of the 17-year-old high school student, basically. So once they pick 3 to 5 of sort of their user groups that are going to be the key ones for the website or the product, we then build user personas around those groups. Who's familiar with the term personas? I know all the designers are, right? Essentially what we're doing with personas is we're trying to create a model user that describes the demographics, characteristics, wants, needs, desires of the user group. So let's stick with Drexel. Anyone here work with Drexel, by the way? Maybe I shouldn't stick with Drexel. Pick a school no one's at. Anyway, we'll do it. Stateu.edu, right? Whatever. Think about the incoming freshmen, and obviously the university in this case are going to know a lot about who their incoming freshmen are. Whether they're the super high achiever kids, which is probably what you're getting at Drexel, whether they come from a wealthier background or tend to be more middle class, whether they tend to be local or more national or international in scope. And we essentially just build out with a stock photo, for Amy here. She's our 17-year-old high school senior, from a major metropolitan area, probably in Pennsylvania, super high achiever, 3.7, leadership, sports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She's going to Drexel. And we just kind of build that out so that we can literally have that person in our head when we're throughout the rest of the project. When you're building a web form, when you're building a process on your web, you can actually be thinking, is this going to help Amy? Is this going to help the school attract Amy? Because that's really what we're trying to do here. And it almost seems kind of silly. When I first saw this, I was kind of like, this is kind of lame. But it really does help because you're just kind of personifying this amorphous user group of incoming high school seniors into like a person, so to speak, that you can kind of keep in the back of your mind anytime you're designing anything for the website or working on a project at all. And then you'll do that for, again, the 2 or 3 other major user groups that you're going to be dealing with too. Okay. So at this point, basically, we're thinking about groups, right? Taking the user groups, kind of distilling them down into one person that represents the group. So the next phase of this process then is to think about individuals. And the exercise we use for this is called Rose, Thorn, Bud. Anybody ever heard of this? Okay. It's actually kind of fun. And this is the one, we're going to do this one here in a minute with a virtual whiteboard, so we'll have some fun with it. But essentially, what we're trying to do is we're getting the stakeholders in the room, so the client group, the web team, whoever you're working with, could be anywhere from 5 to 20-ish people usually. And we literally give them stacks of 3-colored sticky notes, always pink for the rows, which are the good things about your current website if we're doing a website redesign. There's another color that'll be for the thorns, obviously the things that are broken on your website or don't work right. And then there's another color for the buds, which are either things the website doesn't do at all or things that could do better. And obviously there's a lot of overlap between the thorns and the buds because basically every thorn, right, it's an opportunity to improve something. It's a bud. So you got your rose, your thorn, your bud for your basically your good, your bad, and your opportunities. And you get a whiteboard and you draw 3 columns, and everybody takes the sticky notes and just starts brainstorming. Website's not responsive, right? That's going to be a serious thorn for any website in 2019 if they're not accessible. I would hope everything's responsive by now. Not accessible in 2019, it's a serious thorn, right? So that would be in our case here, it would be a gray sticky, I think, from the middle column here, purple. I guess that purple looks gray on my screen. And you end up with this whiteboard or wall full of sticky notes, just describing attributes of the system we're trying to design, both good, bad, and could be better. And then you take a step back and you try to cluster them into some obvious-looking groups. Now, this is from at DrupalCon. We had a big whiteboard in our booth, and we did a rosebud thorn exercise or rose thorn bud exercise around Drupal 8 as a content delivery system. So, as people came by our booth and said hi, we asked them, grab a sticky note and give us their opinion. So we kind of broke it up into back end, front end, and content. That's sort of how the notes we got played out. And as you can see, the blue in this case are thorns. People aren't real happy with the back end of Drupal 8. I mean, there's a lot of thorns in that cluster, right? Whereas the front end, well, the roses are kind of dominating, and there's lots of opportunities to improve, but people weren't really hating it. That, quite frankly, is backwards if I would have thought it would have come out. I sort of feel like maybe it's just because I'm more of a technical person, but I sort of think like the back end of Drupal is pretty good, whereas the theme layer, decouple, it's all kind of a mess sometimes, but, that's why we do these things. We don't have the answers, right? We want to ask. So at this point now, think about where we are in this process with our client, our imaginary client. We've kind of helped them figure out who their users are. We've kind of helped them prioritize their users. Now we've asked them to think about the system that we're working on or trying to design. And we've done a bunch of work here to identify what's good and what's bad about it. And then we tried to build some order into what's good and bad about it here by clustering things together. So then sort of the final, if you consider this 3 phases of this process then, is to actually start working on fixing things. Now that we've identified our users, identified where they're having problems, we can actually start to suggest things that can fix it. And the exercise we use for this is called statement starters. And literally, a statement starter is just an evocative phrase. How can we make the website accessible? How can we make the website more appealing to 17-year-olds? What can we do? They're open-ended statements or open-ended questions, if you think of it that way, that get people thinking about solutions. And what we actually do in practice in a room like this, if this was the client group, is we break you up into like groups of 3 or 4, so 5 or 6 groups of 3 or 4, and we give you each like one of the major things that came out of the Rosebud Thorn exercise that was like a major problem. And again, you'd have in each group of 4, you'd have like maybe somebody from IT, somebody from marketing, so they kind of be cross-functional groups that don't work together again. And we'd say, okay, for the next 10 minutes, start spitting out sticky notes, one idea per sticky note of, how we can fix the website. What can we do now? How can we make things better? How can we address the problems that are on the sticky notes you're working on? So they do that process, and you end up with everyone's got a stack of sticky notes. And the final thing we have to do then is make some order out of that. So we draw this grid on the whiteboard, that y-axis being difficulty or cost of implementing whatever the idea is on the sticky note, the x-axis being importance, from not particularly important to critically important. And we ask them to just go up one at a time and put, make the site responsive. Where would that go in that process, right? That's got to be super important. And depending on the state of the website, it could be at the bottom line really cheap. It could be sort of up towards the middle. As being kind of expensive if it's in bad shape. And you do that with all the sticky notes, and as you can kind of see on the one here in the bottom, there's 3 connected together because basically there's 3 of the same idea. So you consolidate where you can, and the clients work together, and they argue a bit about what's more important and what other things are more important. And ultimately, they agree. They've kind of got all the features, functions of the new website that they need to do lined up the way they want. And now it becomes super easy because which group are we gonna focus on? If you're the client group and you got to figure out what you're going to start with first, what do you start on? Right there, right? Important. It doesn't cost so much. That's your priority 1 task list for things to either redesign or if you're just trying to fix a website. The stuff up here is strategic. That's usually going to be big, expensive projects. Needs executive buy-in, board approval. So those are your long-term next 2 to 5 year projects to make the website take it to where you want it to go. The luxury column there on top, you're probably going to ignore those. They're expensive and they don't really do much for you. So those tasks probably never get done. And then the bottom corner there, the low-hanging fruit, they don't cost much, but they don't really do much for you either. So you may or may not address those in a hurry. But think about what we've just done here in our imaginary client project here. We started, 9 in the morning on the whiteboard in a room like this, talking about who are our users, and here by the end of the day, we've kind of led them through a process where they've literally created, their project plan in a way for the website. They know exactly what they need to work on next.
It's a forced ranking of
yeah.
projects. Yeah.
And it works really well. And again, because people in a room, they're playing with sticky notes, it's kind of fun too. It's not like drudgery. Like you might think all day in a room talking about what website design can be drudgery. This actually ends up being kind of fun. So now we're going to do it. We're going to fix Drupal right here today. So just real brief reminder on Rose, Thorn, Bud, in case you've already blanked out what I said 5 minutes ago. Roses are positive attributes. Thorns are negative, and buds are opportunities, things that could be better. And again, thorn, bud, sort of a judgment call. So head to this link on your phone or your laptop, bit.ly/PhillyRBT, and I will open it up here. So you can see you got your rose column, your thorn column, your bud column. You click the plus to essentially create a sticky note. Let's just take a couple of minutes and, everybody try to get at least one in each column if you can think of something. And what we're going to work on here, is the kind of problem statement is Drupal 8 is a small organization web platform. There's been a lot of discussion in the Drupal world about Drupal 8 maybe not being as useful to a small organization or like a small agency or a small company as 7 was because of the overhead of object-oriented programming and
What's
Symfony
the
and all that
URL?
stuff.
URL?
Oh, bit.ly, bit.ly/Philly RBT. Did I get that right? Yeah. bit.ly/Philly RBT. And this thing should just update in real time for us as people start
Like this site art.
popping ideas in. Again, we're thinking about is Drupal 8 as a small organization web platform.
Generally, it's better than it used to be. Any page.
Yeah, any page.
Back in your front.
I'll try to do a couple of buds since you guys are ignoring the buds.
That's what I decided.
Too much information. Yeah, that's where we just heard.
All right, I'll give it one more minute. So. There, bud. All right, cool. That's awesome. You guys are more positive. I was really expecting the blue column to just blow. Just keep going. You guys are being really positive. That's great. Okay, next thing we're going to do then is, actually I'm not going to back my slide for this, is in each column, vote for your favorite two. You see the little thumbs up voting interface there. So in each column, vote for your favorite two, and we'll kind of talk about the ones that get voted up. We're still getting votes. Cool. All right, back to my presentation for a minute. Now we voted. Okay. Back to it for a minute. All right. We're not going to try to do affinity clustering because of time and because I really kind of be hard to do. If you really got to have the sticky notes out to sort of start moving them around to do that. But I think if we look at it, you start to see some groupings, right? I mean, back end again, obviously, is well represented in the thorn category. You know, on the buds thing, obviously within buds you see a couple of things about, you know, you could like make this sort of quick start, right? You know, click here to install a Drupal that for, you know, auto dealerships or whatever, you know, medical practices, and you can sort of already have the content types they need, and now they just need to be able to go in there and add content, right? I mean, that technically we all know that can be done. It's not that hard. So that opportunity is there. The roses, you know, again, as people, nothing there particularly surprises any of us probably. But you see how quickly we gathered quite a lot of data. I mean, if someone had said to you, you know, an hour ago, how long would it take to gather this much data from a group of people? 5 minutes would not have been your answer, right? I mean, you would be thinking, you got a lot more time talking about it, trying to figure out what to do. But that's sort of the whole point of this exercise, the rose, thorn, bud, is it lets us gather a lot of data from a group of people that frequently aren't super related to each other, other than they work for the same company, very quickly about, you know, a system or product that we're trying to design, and gives us a lot of really good information to work on to move forward. Okay. Back to present mode. Okay, I will have our creative director take this, and she will do a blog post. She'll do the affinity clustering exercise, do some graphics on it, and put it up on her blog. So permanentsource.com/blog, probably in a week or two. If you're curious, there'll be something up there that's kind of takes this to the next step and analyzes it a little bit. Statement starters, okay. Let me go back. We'll try to pick the top one in each category here. Statement starters, high learning curve, lots of terminology to learn. So how can we make Drupal easier to learn? And I mean the Drupal community. right? I mean, we'll kind of keep it really broad here. Awful naming scheme for sections, content, paragraphs, etc. Right? So how can we improve the naming scheme to make more sense to normal humans? Right? Difficult if you don't have a developer. How can we make Drupal more useful for people or teams that don't have a Drupal developer ready to go? You kind of see how that goes, right? So if this were the actual client meeting, that's exactly what we would do. We break up into groups. We'd assign each a couple of these, and you would start to work through the brainstorming of what can we actually do to make this better. So if we think about the chart we had a minute ago, the graph, right? Y-axis is cost, x-axis is importance. Let's just pick a couple of the thorns and talk about where you put those on that continuum. So assume coming high learning curve, lots of terminology to learn. How can we make the terminology in Drupal easier to understand, right? Someone give me an answer. Actually, you know what? I got a better idea. Actually, I take that back. I think I have an exercise for this I'm forgetting about. Present. We'll do one. There we go, yep. bit.ly/philly.ss. It'll bring up a blank board, and we'll just pick that top thorn. What's it again? High learning. How can we make Drupal terminology easier to learn? And just throw in your one idea. We'll keep this one quick. So that's a hand in the back there? Or are you just stretching?
Yeah, every time you go to a page, let's say you go to content types.
Yep.
You should have a link to somebody that has a video that just explains what's happening. Because sometimes
Built in.
you read it and it's like
Built-in commercial style help system, basically.
Right,
yeah. Somebody volunteers to spend 3,000 hours building that. Drupal will have it, right? So
it could just be a link to videos that have already been created.
yeah. Okay, so ignore my question there. I kind of had a default one there in case nothing good came out of the exercise. But I think that's a good one. How can we make Drupal terminology easier to understand? So just do one. Don't have to kill ourselves on this one. Okay. Now let's place a couple of these on that grid. We'll just take modify, try to get 2 liter. Okay.
So are we the client company here?
Well, in this case, it's more of an internal project. We're trying to fix Drupal as the Drupal community.
we work
but
there,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, we work for Drupal.
Yeah.
Put you want to think about it that way, sure. Okay, so I'm gonna arbitrarily kind of group these into 2 because I see a couple of repeats. Use less scientific, more sort of common language terminology, and then also a couple of us said actually do UI, UX, human centered design research to figure out what that terminology should be. And that's perfect because those are kind of bookends, yeah. So the first one, just use less technical jargon in Drupal. Where would we put that?
Important but less difficult.
Yeah, I would think so. Anybody want to argue for any other thing on that one?
It might be a medium difficulty just because of how interconnected it is with the whole ecosystem. But
And and again, what's less technical mean, right? I mean, what's less technical to some of us is still technical to other people, so you have to bridge that gap, which leads into the other suggestion, which is actually do that kind of human-centered research we're talking about here to figure out what the average Drupal user knows, understands, needs, wants about this stuff, and and actually have some justification for the terms we use, and that's not just the person that wrote the code decided we're going to call them paragraphs, right? That you actually have the research behind it. Where would you put that one?
It's expensive.
It's important and expensive, right? It's going to be in the top corner. Because I mean, you're going to have to bring a UX firm in, and you're going to get Drupal people in a room and do all this stuff, right? Pull those up. So exactly. So if we were the internal, those were our two options, right? And we were the internal team. What we would decide to do is probably try to start off with just the obvious ones that we can update the terminology on, with a longer range plan maybe to get budgeting to bring in a UX firm to actually help us figure out what all this stuff in the back end of Drupal should be called. That would how you would really do it in the real world. Make sense? Cool. Okay. Does this stuff actually work? I think we just proved it did. And the reason it works is because it forces us to fail early and fail often. If we're going to fail, we want to fail when we're moving sticky notes around and deciding which category they're in, not when we've invested $35,000 in a UX study. It turns out it didn't help us. Or, anybody here work for Hertz or Accenture? Good. Or you're Hertz and you gave Accenture $35 million for a website that doesn't work. Right? Which, if you've seen the news, there's actually a lawsuit over that right now. They clearly didn't fail early and fail often, right? So Tom Glib, this author of Principles of Software Engineering Management, says that it costs 10 times as much to fix a problem during development as it would have during design or concepting phase, and it costs 100 times as much to fix it if you don't fix it until after the system's in production. And this is another way to look at that same data. We want to iterate and change in the concepting phase when we're working with sticky notes, wireframes and Sketch and that sort of thing, not when we've got themes fully built out in Drupal. Obviously, once you're building it, you are going to revise things, and obviously, once you release stuff, you're always refining it. But hopefully, those are evolutional changes and not you're going back to the beginning because something was done horribly wrong up front. As I talked about, this is all just sort of step one, right? We're just working with the customer, the customer's group here. We haven't talked to the users yet. The users may have very different ideas. The customer may not know their users that well. So then you have to go to step two, validate your data. You got to do user interviews, usability testing, stakeholder interviews, prototyping. We know all this stuff, and that's, quite frankly, another 45-minute presentation by itself. Come back next year for it, right? Okay, a couple of case studies where we've actually done this with clients, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of what we learned in them. Lehigh, anybody here from Lehigh by chance? That's there, so lovely, cool. It was kind of funny you guys talked about the terminology, because one of the things that came out of the Lehigh study we did with them was that they didn't have the same terminology for elements of the website. The IT folks, I wasn't there, so I don't know the details, but the IT folks might say left nav bar, and that was something the marketing people called that something different. They literally didn't have the same terminology for certain elements of the website, which, as you can imagine, would make cross-department communication a little bit cumbersome. So one of the main things we did with them is kind of help them get a common terminology for things on the website. And then, just to prove that I'm not making this stuff and we actually do this with customers, there's their sticky note board. Full of high-value, relatively low-cost things to do and sort of big projects for the next few years.
You have no low-hanging fruit, nothing to get started with.
Right. Okay. Another client we worked with is a B2B ERP app company, and they were doing a Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 migration/redesign. And they had done this exercise on their D7 site with somebody else and had 6 or 7 key user groups. And one of the things that we figured out with them was that part of the reason why they felt like people couldn't find stuff on their website was because they were essentially getting into the wrong content channel, because the user groups were a little too narrow, I guess, and it was really easy to end up essentially in the wrong place in the website, thinking you're finding support information for their app, and you're actually like over in their B2B sales section. So we super simplified that to literally, when you go to the website, click here if you're a B2B customer, click here if you're a consumer using our app. And that sort of gets them into the right content section much quicker and improves the success rate of people using the website. And then one more, just because this one was a different project and that it was a super quick and relatively cheap project as compared to sort of these big design things. American Library Association got a little bit of grant money from Google to build out a website that basically help librarians essentially build like coding programs for kids in the libraries. To where they're trying to like promote libraries as a place kids can come to start to get their fingers wet in software development. So they had to think about who the end user was here, right? It's basically the librarians. This is targeting them. And it was a project we had to launch in 40 days, so it wasn't like a big expensive, Drupal 8, migration site build. It was Drupal 8 site with a pretty simple UI and a couple of dozen pages, I think. But you can still do this kind of thing. It still helps. In that case, maybe more, because it ensures that every hour we spend on the project is spent on the right stuff. Because it was 40 days and not much money, so there wasn't a lot of room to redo stuff or go down the wrong path. So, the final slide. Don't cheer. Takeaways. This is what I'm hoping you learn in the next 45, 50 odd minutes. Human-centered design is a process that can be learned. It's essentially a methodology for running effective meetings, if you really boil down what we're doing here with it, right? Trying to make sure that the purpose of these design sessions with clients, that we get what we need at the end. The client gets what they need. It results in lower risk, lower costs, better websites or products. It drives client engagement, cross-functional collaboration, and teamwork, all which have benefits that extend beyond, just the results of the day's work. And I think it's kind of fun. And our feedback from clients is that it's kind of fun. So, how are we doing? Good. Questions? Comments? Criticism? I'll take it all. I have to do it again in Minnesota in a month. So, yes.
I wrote down the tool we used for the rose thorn bud thing, but
Yep.
do you have any other suggestions for free tools for like people learning or trying things out, and also other resources?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the Luma Institute's website, there's a whole bunch of information there. I mean, they're trying to sell you on coming and doing their training, but there's a whole lot of information on their website and about sort of other resources, links to articles that go into more depth. So that's one great place to start. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much. You got a 10-minute break for the next session is now, I think. So